Next up will be Brian Chatham. Chatham, is that right, Brian? Okay, with Ducks Unlimited, giving us an overview of chemical history and residue and carryover and how that may impact your seeding. And so these types of things get really important because when we think about the time, we think about the money that's typically invested in a seeding project, restoration project, we want to make sure that we know what issues we may run into with that particular seed mix. And we'll get really deep into seed mixes later today. But this is a really good place to start when we think about the fields that we have, because you want to make sure that you are making the best use of that investment, not only of your money to buy the seed, but of your time. And we want to give you the best possible chance of a successful seeding in the long run. Brian's going to give us some background. Maybe while he's in that setup, you just want to give us a little bit of an introduction to who you are and your work with DU.
Yeah. My name's Brian Chatham. I'm the manager of agronomy for the Great Plains regions for Ducks Unlimited. And my background is large farm management. I am from North Carolina originally, but I've been out west for about 8 years. And moved out west and ran some pretty large operations in Nebraska, North Dakota, and Montana. So prior to my manager's role, I worked in the field with producers and working with our cost share program, but mainly our cover crops. And kind of cover crops is kind of my forte, kind of my background. But with that comes, as our programs go, a lot of grass restoration. So we have a tendency to work with producers on both sides of that, both sides of the ball there. So what we're going to talk about today is native grass restoration and herbicides and the importance, the downfalls, and honestly, if we really got down in the weeds, proverbial weeds, pardon the pun there, this is a 2-hour conversation. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of science out there. And was talking to Pete a couple weeks ago, and you know, in the ag chemical world, there's new chemicals that hit the market every day. And so we're just going to hit some of the high spots. We're going to go down into any rabbit holes, kind of talk about planning and things like that. And then I think at the end we have a little panel discussion or something. But let's see if we can get this rolling. All right, the importance of chemicals. And as Kent alluded to, chemicals are a very critical tool in our toolbox when we talk about native grass and forb restoration. I have worked with a tremendous amount of producers over the years reseeding native warm season grass and forbs from North Carolina all the way to Montana. And I will say they can be your best friend, but they can also be your enemy. But the importance of chemicals. Using herbicides before seeding native grasses is critical for several reasons. First of all is weed control. Anybody that's been around a fallow piece of crop ground in South Dakota knows that as soon as you turn it fallow, we have a huge flush of weeds. And if you're looking to seed warm season grasses and forbs, that is an extreme hindrance. So we use chemicals for weed control, helps eliminate the existing weeds that compete with native grasses, sunlight, nutrients, and it can, if you don't control those weeds, they can significantly hinder your grass and forb stand. Then it helps us with soil preparation. It helps with eliminating that competition, ensures that the planting area is free from weed seeds. One of the cool things that I talk to producers about is, particularly with covers, in an agronomic setting, but this goes into the warm season grass establishment, is everything in Mother Nature's on a cycle, okay? So we know that every year that weed comes up, and its sole purpose is to what? Produce seeds, okay? All right, so if we can use warm season grasses, or if we can use chemicals and or cover crops, in this case chemicals, to eliminate a weed cycle, in other words, from seed to seed, then we stand a greater chance of our warm season grass and forbs to be successful. Improved establishment, if we can control or eliminate weeds before planting and after planting, we have a better chance to establish themselves. Some of these warm season grasses can take up to 4 years after seeding to establish. So it's critically important that we look at that from that standpoint. We've got to give that seed the best possible situation to survive. We all know that they're expensive. Warm season grass seeds they're not cheap, and so, or native warm season or cool season, native seeds are not cheap. So the more we can help those seeds succeed, the better off we are. And then the long-term success of our grass and forb stand, effective weed management, it's critical. We can get these, if we can eliminate a lot of these noxious weeds, a lot of the nasties, the kochias, the palmers, whatever have you, whatever's the worst in your neck of the woods, then we have a better chance of a long-term successful establishment. So real quick, talk about some common herbicides, and I'll if you got any questions about these, please write it down, talk to it during the thing, but I'm just going to burn through some of these. The glyphosates, Roundup, Rodeo, and that's either the either formulation of the gly, because you got 2 different formulations that guys use. You got the Roundup and the Roundup Ultra, or however you want to call it, and it's systemic. It's very effective. However, we do know that we do have some glyphosate-resistant weeds, so be cognizant of that. Imazapar, Arsenal, Bilospectrum, and we'll talk about the downsides of these in just a second. But long residual activity. I would not recommend anything with Imazapar in it if you got forbs, because we'll talk about that why in just a second. One of the common ones we run into, and sort of a Band-Aid, is gramoxone or paraquat. Gramoxone is the industry name, and it's basically a contact herbicide. It has no residual, and it just burns chemically what it touches. It does not take it to the roots. So we do have some producers that use that. Then we get into the more selective broadleaf stuff, 2,4-D, dicamba, Garlon. Those are great, but those also, with those come management issues. We'll talk about those a little bit later in the situation, or in the presentation, excuse me. Milestone is being used more and more in South Dakota for thistles, and again, it does have some downfalls. Stinger, and then the one that we run into, one of the most ones, is wide match, and that's clopyralid and fluxapore. It does a great job. It's used a lot in small grains. It's used a lot before guys put out cover crops, but it does have downfalls. Some more commonly used ones for native grass restorations, Plateau, and then Paramount. You can see there on that what they control. Those are more grass selective, and then Outrider. And then one of the other ones that we see a lot, it's 2,4-D and dicamba. mixed together. It's inexpensive, but with that comes a price. And one of the ones that I will say too, or one of the types of herbicides is a pre-plant herbicide. A lot of guys will come in, particularly if they're doing a complete grass with no forbs stand, is the pre-plant stuff, and you can, there's tons of them out there. I don't want to get too far into depth on that, but these are just some of the most common ones. Again, there's pros and cons to every one of them, and I could sit here and talk an hour about each one of those pros and cons, but you kind of get the gist of what we're talking about. Everything that we try to work with does have systemic activity, so we want that to get a good kill. We want that plant to take that chemical into the root. And then with some of the pre-plant options we actually know that the pre-plant, the triazonine family, and some more that actually kill the seed or kill the seedling before it emerges. And so those are the ones we have to really, it's, again, a management thing. The downsides. One of the biggest ones, and I highlighted two of the ones, the ones that I see the most when I work with producers. And guys, I've seen it pretty much, I've seen it all. Again, it's there's a lot of management to this and a lot of decision making and a lot of record keeping that needs to take place. But most of our herbicides, especially our broadleaf herbicides, have a residual effect. They have long soil persistence, particularly here in eastern South Dakota. We have a little higher organic matter than other parts of the country. That high organic matter holds on to things, including chemicals. Residual effects damages our seedlings, okay? And we have to take that into consideration. It can actually ruin, some of these mixed seed mixes are, $300-400 an acre, maybe even more, and it can completely wipe it out. Number two, this is kind of something that we've run into in the last couple of years. I was listening to a conversation Cassie and somebody else was having out in the lobby at lunchtime, and we're talking about airplane drift of whatever. As we get more and more Roundup or chemical resistance in weeds, we have more and more opportunity for non-selective herbicide drift, particularly from neighbors, particularly with some of the stuff that's used in soybeans and corn. So here it's saying glyphosate, but the biggest one we see now, does anybody know what it is? Can't spray it after July or June 30th. Dicamba drift. Do what? Oh, they completely took dicamba in South Dakota? Oh, in select counties? Okay. Well, so dicamba drift, I have a lot of stories about dicamba. I literally have seen dicamba being sprayed at night, and the next morning, 8 miles away, the leaves wilt in town, just because of volatility. Glyphosate drift, and then broadleaf selective herbicides, they aromatize or they become volatile, and 2,4-D, things like that, anything that has a broadleaf selective pretty much can drift, and we get convection, heat convection, and it can cause a drift. It cannot be you. It could be your neighbor across the road. It could be somebody that's spraying an airplane 5 miles down the road. You don't know how wind currents and things affect that. One thing that me and Cassie ran into last year was over-application or incorrect dosage. We had a producer that hired a co-op, and they came out, and I think they threw everything in the tank but the kitchen sink, wasn't followed by label, and ended up creating a whole lot of issues. Over application or incorrect dosage. Applying too much, post plant or pre plant can create issues. Those little seedlings, those little grass seedlings, and particularly the forb seedlings, they're really sensitive to a lot of this stuff. And I'll talk about in just a second, but like the grasses, you got growing points. If you damage those growing points, it pretty much is done. And the broadleafs, a lot of them can be dicotyledons, and you damage one of the leaves, or one of the leaves gets hit with chemical, and it's fried. So number one and number three are the two ones that I see the most in the field. Soil microbial disruption, this is kind of a deep, dark rabbit hole, but it is more of this is coming out. A lot of guys are spraying. We do know that some particular herbicides like glyphosate can disrupt microbes in the soil, affecting nutrient uptake, affecting the microbial health in the soil, and that's one of the things to take in consideration. Another big one we have in eastern South Dakota is moisture or the lack thereof, and environmental stress, particularly if you get a grass stand established and it comes up, or it's struggling to come up, but you do have a flush of weeds and you're trying to eradicate them. When that plant, when it's stressed out, when you have outward stressors like environment, and then you hit it with another stressor, a chemical stressor, then you have it's pretty much two negatives, and that can create issues in your stand. And then not knowing what growth stage you're at with your grasses can also be a hindrance. If you're applying chemicals at the wrong stage, say some of your grasses are in the spike stage or a boot stage and you're not supposed to apply herbicides, then you can have a failed stand there. Some of those plants need to come up and get mature before they can tolerate certain selective herbicides. So when this rolls into the chemical side of things, some of these chemicals, and there's thousands of these chemicals. They all have different names. Some of them are in the same family. Some of them have multiple families. But basically, one of the things as a manager or as a landowner that we need to have this conversation with the producer or whoever is in charge of this, the manager, some of these chemicals have a 10-day or even up to a 24-month residual. So there's some broadleaf selective herbicides that if you apply it and the organic matter is higher than 2%, you're not supposed to plant another broadleaf in that for 24 months. So that can greatly diminish the success of your stand. Like I said, there's thousands of these chemicals, so it's going to depend on the label. Going into what Kent said is you need to know what soils you're in, the rough organic material you're containing, when this chemical was sprayed, then goes into what's in my seed mix. Am I doing a pure grass stand? Am I doing a 60-40, a 70-30? How much forbs are in there? Are the forbs, are they legumes? So there's a lot to that to take into consideration. Was the ground worked after the chemical was sprayed? Some of the chemicals require the ground to be worked. Some of these chemicals that we apply agronomically or pre-plant, like Treflan would be one that's used sometimes, some of the Treflans, you got to work the ground, and it has to rain on it. So as it goes through the soil, it's killing the seed of what's in there. So then you come in and plant, and everything works. Did you use a pre-plant? Okay. All right. Here's the management issue. What was the last crop that was there? Okay. Was it corn? Was it beans? What did the person use as a pre-plant? What did they use post-plant? Did they use this is very rare in South Dakota, but did they use a desiccant? Did they desiccate the whatever was there? Was it wheat? Did they kill the wheat off? Did they need to spray the soybeans to defoliate the beans? Knowing what they used. Okay, is the ground irrigated? How much did I irrigate that? Did it have enough to move that chemical out of the soil? And then obviously we talked about the drought, and then the wet weather or snow. So a lot of these chemicals, as we work through them, as you read labels, and it's very critical to the success that we know what chemicals we're using. And folks, I will say that it's not just a matter of calling your local co-op and say, hey, I got thistles, come spray, because we run into that issue. Then they just throw the kitchen sink at it. You don't know what the grasses they're putting back. They don't know anything, and so then you end up, oh crap, I just put out a $500 an acre seed mix, and it's not coming up. Oh wait, the co-op didn't follow label or whatever, and my seed mix is not coming up, or it came up and it stunted it, or so that's some of the things to consider chemically, and knowing when to plant your seed and knowing when to apply your chemicals. So preventative measures, some of the things that we as managers and landowners need to be aware of. Record keeping. I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think everybody that has a chemical license, even a commercial applicator's license in the state of South Dakota, has to do record keeping. What you sprayed, the environmental conditions. Now, however, do they follow that? Do they write it down? No. But one of the cool things is as we technologically advance in farming, and you're in the sprayer, and you click, and you're going through a field and selecting a field. I know when I was in Montana and we were spraying, it logged everything. So I could print out when I was in the sprayer and I was spraying, I pull into a field and boom, boom, and then I finished it. It saved it, and I knew exactly the temperature, how fast I sprayed, et cetera, et cetera. So those things are important to know. As you plan this and as you take chemicals into consideration, knowing your record keeping, being able to plan. Again, we need to know our soil tests, which will also help us with chemical, believe it or not, will help with chemical applications. Here's the big one. Weed ID, knowing what we're spraying. Do I have Roundup resistant kochia? Do I have Roundup resistant Palmer, red root pigweed, whatever it might be? Do I have, did my neighbor have dicamba beans and they're spraying whatever. But knowing my weed ID is a big one, and knowing what to spray, okay? And then the one we kind of don't have a control over is knowing and having a conversation with their neighbor. Hey, by the way, I'm reseeding grass. Could you help me out and not blast all your spray over on my field too? And then proper seed selection, what chemicals you used. And there's a million things to talk about with that, but knowing, am I going all forbs and all that based off of the crop that was there even 2 years ago. Pete asked me to talk about some case studies real quick. And guys, there's a million case studies out there. Kansas State just put out one last week. And basically, long story short, was grain sorghum, grazed, planted to warm season grasses, complete failure. Why? Because of the application of a pre-emergent herbicide in the grain sorghum that required before, or that they did before. They didn't have enough soil moisture to move that through, so when they planted their warm season grass mix into that, it basically failed, poor stand. Percentage-wise, I think it was like a 20% stand. But there's thousands of case studies out there that we could talk about. I know there's one coming up right after me talking about a particular ranch. But I could tell you a half a dozen right off the top of my head here just in the past couple of years in South Dakota. But basically what it boils down to is improper record keeping, improper weed ID, and improper improper chemical rates. So basically, that's all I have for chemicals. Again, it is a broad topic. We could talk hours about it, but that's just kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of the chemical side of things. You know, I work with a lot of producers and help select herbicides for their grass establishment. And so I recommend that if you do that, to do your homework and know what's coming out. As this grass thing gets more and more popular, there's herbicides that are coming out that are designed for certain species. I know there's a lot out for blue stem and switchgrass and other things, but particularly, you know, if you're coming out of a grass crop, know what was like grass crop, meaning wheat or corn. Know what chemicals they used if you're planting or if you're planting grasses back with that. Soybeans is a little better, but then you have the issue if you're putting soybeans in, what did they treat? What did they hit with their herbicides to control broadleafs and things like that? But that's all for chemicals for me. Anybody have any questions? Or I think maybe we're holding questions till the end. Thanks, guys.